Chapter 1. Every morning, Siiri woke up and realised that she wasn't dead yet. Then she got out of bed, washed, dressed, and ate something for breakfast. It took her a while, but she had the time. She read the newspaper diligently and listened to the morning radio shows. It made her feel like she belonged in this world. She often went for a ride on the tram around 11 o'clock, but she didn't feel like it today. The bright institutional lighting gave the common room of Sunset Grove Retirement Home the atmosphere of a dentist's waiting room. Several residents dozed on the sofas, waiting for lunch. In the corner, Annalisa, Irma and the ambassador were playing rummy at the cloth-covered card table. The ambassador was absorbed in his own cards. Annalisa was keeping up a running commentary on the other players' hands, and Irma was looking impatient at the slow progress of the game. Then she saw Siiri, and her eyes brightened. "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" she crowed in a high falsetto, waving with a broad sweep of her arm like a train conductor. Irma Lemu had taken singing lessons in her youth, and had once sung the Cherubino aria to piano accompaniment at the conservatory matinee, and since student performances were reviewed back then, a newspaper music critic had praised her voice as supple and resonant. This crowing call was Irma and Siiri's customary greeting. It always worked, even in the middle of a noisy conversation or on a busy street. "Guess what?" Irma said, before Siiri had even sat down at the table. "The Hat Lady in Sea Wing isn't dead after all, and we'd practically finished grieving for her." She laughed until her plump body jiggled and her voice rang even higher. Irma always wore a dress, preferably dark in colour, and even on ordinary days wore earrings with many-faceted stones, a string of pearls around her neck and 2 gold bracelets on her left wrist. When she spoke, her exuberant gestures made the bracelets jangle pleasantly. Last week, the flag at Sunset Grove had been flown at half-mast, and since they hadn't seen the Hat Lady for several days, they thought she'd died. But yesterday she had reappeared, wearing her broad-brimmed turquoise hat and playing bingo, like she always did. She'd just been out getting a spare part for her heart, and in the process had nearly died of a cardiac infarction. "She says she may live for 10 more years, poor thing," Irma said. Siiri laughed, her grey eyes twinkling. Irma made the woman's medical recovery sound like an extended sentence, which of course it was. "It wasn't a spare part for her heart, strictly speaking," Annalisa said, in that no-nonsense way she had of correcting any errors or discrepancies of meaning. It was an obsession with her. Siiri and Irma thought it was due to the fact that Annalisa had once been a Finnish language and literature teacher. "I've got a red 3!" the ambassador shouted. But that didn't stop Annalisa. "Angioplasty is the vernacular, the most commonly used term for it. They use a thing called a stent, a sort of mesh tube to hold the artery open." Annalisa was a tall woman with a deep, full-throated voice. She knew everything you could possibly know about angioplasty, replacement parts, local anaesthetic and arthroscopic surgery, but they never paid any attention to her explanations. Having worked as a teacher, however, Annalisa was used to not being listened to. "It's sheer lunacy to get spare parts at the age of 90, Siiri said. Everyone else agreed. "Do you think you'll live to be 100, girls?" the ambassador asked, laying his cards down on the table and straightening his tie. He always dressed correctly, as befitted a former diplomat, in a smart shirt, tie, brown smoking jacket and straight-legged trousers, which was nice, since many of the men at Sunset Grove shambled around in ugly tracksuits. On important days and Sundays, the ambassador wore a tidy suit with an oak leaf veteran's insignia on the lapel. "It's not as if it matters what we think," Siiri said, because that's what she thought. "I wouldn't want to be that old, though." "If it wasn't the hat lady who died last week, I wonder who it was," Irma said. She was very curious and always on the lookout for gossip at Sunset Grove. Her information on this event had been proved wrong, and so, understandably, she was a little upset about it. "It was that boy, the cook. Tero, I think his name was," Annalisa said, laying down 3 sevens. Siiri's head buzzed and her throat felt dry. She stared at Annalisa. She couldn't believe that Tero could be dead. Irma, on the other hand, looked delighted at the news because she remembered that she'd heard about it before and then promptly forgotten about it. "That's right! You really liked Tero, didn't you, Siiri? Was his name Tero? Have you noticed how young men nowadays all have 2-syllable names? Tero, Pasi, Vesa, Tommy? Imagine my not telling you about it right away. I heard about it yesterday from the masseurs, but after all her pummeling, I was so worn out that I just had a whiskey and went to bed. My doctor has prescribed whiskey for my everything. Look, I've got 2 sevens for you, Annalisa." Suddenly, Siiri felt sad. She missed Tero so much that her stomach hurt. How was it possible that such a healthy young man could die while 94-year-olds never seemed to? Siiri had read in the paper that once you lived to be 90, you stopped aging. How horrible! That meant that overaged people like her were late for their death. First, everybody died, friends, spouses. Then nobody did. 2 of Siiri's children were already dead, her eldest son from too much alcohol and her youngest from too much food. He'd been the baby of the family, a handsome, athletic boy when he was young, but then he ate himself to such a girth, doing nothing outside work, driving everywhere he went, eating pizza and crisps and smoking cigarettes. It was called affluenza, when a person reaches such a high standard of living that they die from it at the age of 65. But Tero, the cook at Sunset Grove, was 35 if he was a day, and he hadn't looked sick at all. On the contrary, he'd been glowing with good health, the way only a healthy young man can. Broad shoulders, strong hands, good colour in his face. That was the kind of person he was. And when he smiled, he had dimples in both cheeks. Their friendship had begun over the mashed potatoes. The Sunset Grove cafeteria served mashed potatoes altogether too often. They never offered rice. They thought that old people didn't have any teeth, and mashed potatoes would go down easily, like baby food. None of the food was ever salted, and unminced meat was something they could only dream of. Siiri didn't like mashed potatoes, so Tero kindly arranged to have some other side dish for her under the counter, some carrots or beetroot or something. After lunch, he would come over to her table for a cup of coffee, and when Siiri asked if he had a girlfriend, he said that he didn't need one because he had her. They had a way of flirting like that, and it was fun, a kind of harmless, happy chatter, which there wasn't much of at Sunset Grove. The card game seemed to be over. The ambassador asked Irma how old she was. No one except Siiri really seemed to care about the young cook's death. 92, the ambassador marvelled. So you don't have a driver's license anymore? You're welcome to my taxis, Irma dear. I have so many taxi coupons that I would have to ride around in a taxi all day long to use them up. Of course I have a driver's license, Irma puffed, resenting the suggestion. I have an old classmate who's a gynecologist, and she writes out driver's license certificates at every alumni meeting. But then my children took my car away just like that, and me a grown woman, with the right to go where I please. I'm sure you remember my little red car." Siiri was the only one who remembered it. She had been friends with Irma for a long time. She had been in it when Irma drove the wrong way down Mannerheimintie, the busiest thoroughfare in Helsinki, and the police pulled her over in front of the Swedish theatre. That was enough for her children to take the little red car back to the dealers. The ambassador thought taking the car away was too severe a punishment. It was no great sin to drive a bit crazily past the Swedish theatre. They were always doing roadworks on that corner, and even a 10th-generation Helsinki resident like Irma couldn't be sure which way you were supposed to go on any given day. "But that's the way it is," Irma said. "Old people have every little thing decided for them." Irma's children and grandchildren, of which there were many, whom she referred to as her darlings, had sold her apartment in Turle and put her in a one-bedroom flat at Sunset Grove without further discussion. They'd said it was for her own good, and it was safer, and this way they would know that she was getting up and taking her medicine every morning and wasn't running around the city in her nightgown. And then they installed a surveillance camera in my apartment so that they can get on the computer whenever they like and watch what I'm doing, as if I were a three-toed sloth at the zoo. I moon the camera every night before I go to bed.